Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at something that I know a lot of our listeners are really interested in, which is how to get to that next level of fluency when you're learning a language.
Yeah, going past just, like textbook learning and really kind of getting into that, how do you think in another language kind of space?
Exactly. That's for everyone.
Exactly. And it's a really interesting look at how to get past translating in your head, which I think is something we all struggle with when we're learning a new language.
Oh, for sure. Like
Yeah.
I constantly find myself like mentally translating every word, and it makes the conversation so slow and clunky, and it just doesn't feel natural at all.
Yeah, I think that's a really common experience. And this text actually digs into why that happens. Why translating in your head actually kind of prevents you from reaching that true fluency.
Oh, interesting. I'd love to hear more about that.
So basically, the text argues that when you're constantly translating, you're essentially creating this mental barrier between yourself and the new language. Like you're trying to force the structure and logic of your native language onto this new system.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. And in doing so, you miss out on the unique nuances and the beauty of that new language. It's like trying to describe a really vivid sunset using only shades of gray.
Oh, I love that analogy. It's like you're limiting your palette of expression.
Exactly. And the text gives this really cool example of the Japanese word komorobi.
Komoribi.
Yeah, it means like the sunlight that filters through the leaves of trees, and there's no direct equivalent in English.
Wow, so there's this whole concept, this whole experience
Yeah.
that's encapsulated in a single word in Japanese that we just don't have a way to express directly in English.
Exactly. And that highlights how each language offers a unique way of seeing and experiencing the world. And when we're stuck in that translation mode, we kind of miss out on those beautiful nuances.
That is so cool. So if fluency isn't just about memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules, then what is it really about?
That's a great question. And I think the text would say that fluency is about achieving what they call automaticity.
Automaticity.
Yeah, it's like that effortless flow where you're no longer consciously thinking about the mechanics of the language. It just kind of comes out naturally.
No, so it's like when you're driving a car,
Mhm.
at first you're so focused on like the clutch and the gears and the mirrors, but then with practice, it just becomes second nature. You just drive.
Exactly. It's that same kind of muscle memory, but for language. And the text argues that the key to achieving that is through active immersion.
Active immersion. So it's not just about passively listening to music or watching movies in the target language.
Right. It's about actively engaging with the language in a way that forces your brain to make those direct connections between meaning and words, bypassing that translation step altogether.
So more like having real conversations, reading actively,
Yeah.
even just thinking to yourself in the new language.
Exactly. It's about creating those immersive experiences that really push your brain to adapt and start thinking in the target language.
That's a really cool concept, and the text actually suggests a specific technique for doing that.
Yeah, they talk about this idea of defining new words using simpler words in the target language itself instead of immediately reaching for your dictionary or your translation app.
Oh, interesting. So it's like building a foundation of understanding within the language itself,
Yeah.
rather than constantly relying on translations.
Exactly. You're training your brain to operate within the framework of the new language. And the text argues that this is way more effective for long-term fluency.
That makes a lot of sense. So instead of seeing those moments where I'm struggling to find the right word as like failures, I should see them as opportunities to push myself to think deeper in the target language.
Exactly. Those moments of frustration can actually be really valuable because they're a sign that you're breaking free from that translation crutch and you're forcing your brain to find new pathways.
It's a mental workout. The more you challenge yourself, the stronger those neural connections become.
Exactly. And over time, those connections become so strong that the language just starts to flow more naturally and effortlessly.
That's so encouraging to hear. And I've also noticed that when I speak another language, I almost feel like a different side of my personality comes out. Is that just me, or is there something to that?
No, that's a really common experience. And the text actually delves into the fascinating connection between language and identity.
Oh, I'd love to hear more about that.
So basically, the text argues that language is more than just words. It's culture mindset, even a way of seeing the world. When you truly immerse yourself in a language, you're not just learning words, you're stepping into a new cultural and cognitive landscape.
Wow, that's a really powerful way to look at it. It's like each language offers a different lens through which to view reality.
Exactly. And the text encourages us to embrace that shift, to play with the nuances of expression, humor, even gestures. It's about truly inhabiting the language.
So it's not just about speaking grammatically correct sentences, it's about capturing the spirit, the essence of that language, and allowing it to shape how you express yourself.
Exactly. And the text argues that this is where the real magic of language learning lies, in that transformation, that expansion of who you are.
This is all so fascinating, and it really highlights how much more there is to fluency than just being able to string a sentence together.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with the language on a much deeper level.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point to remember, because it can be easy to get caught up in the technical aspects of language learning, the grammar rules and the vocabulary lists. But the real goal is to connect with the heart of the language, to make it a part of who you are.
And the text actually offers a really cool concept for how to do that. They call it mini immersion.
Yeah, mini immersion.
So instead of waiting for that dream trip abroad or, finding a native speaker to practice with every day, we can create those immersive experiences right here, right now.
Exactly. It's about finding those little pockets of immersion throughout your day, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
So like changing my phone's language to the target language, or listening to podcasts while I'm doing chores, or even just like narrating my day-to-day activities in my head.
Exactly. Those small, seemingly insignificant actions can actually have a huge impact on your fluency over time, because you're constantly exposing your brain to the language and forcing it to adapt.
This is all so eye-opening. But I have to admit, I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed. It seems like such a long journey to reach that effortless flow.
I totally understand that feeling, and the text actually addresses that fear of overwhelm. It emphasizes that consistency trumps intensity. Instead of trying to cram hours of study into a single day, focus on short, consistent bursts of practice.
So it's like building a muscle. Small, consistent workouts are more effective than one massive session every now and then.
Exactly. You're training your brain to operate in the new language bit by bit, day by day, and over time, those small efforts will add up to significant progress.
That's a really encouraging way to look at it.
Yeah.
It makes language learning feel much more manageable, like something I can actually integrate into my daily life without having to completely overhaul my schedule.
Exactly. And the text offers some great techniques for doing just that. One of them is called shadowing.
Shadowing.
Yeah, it's basically listening to a native speaker and repeating what they say, mimicking their intonation and rhythm as closely as possible.
Oh, that's a cool idea. And it kind of ties back to that idea of active immersion, really embodying the language, not just listening passively.
Exactly. And another technique the text suggests is narrating your thoughts in the target language.
Yeah.
Even if it's just describing what you're doing or what you see around you, it's about making the language a part of your internal monologue.
Those are great ideas, and they all seem to point back to this idea of building those mental reflexes, those automatic responses in the target language.
Exactly. And the text argues that this is where we really start to see the power of our brains at work. Our brains are incredible pattern recognition machines, and when we expose them to the patterns of a new language, they start to internalize those patterns and make those connections without us even realizing it.
It's so cool. It's like we're tapping into this hidden potential, this ability to learn and adapt that we might not even be aware of.
Exactly. And the text argues that we can harness that potential through consistent exposure and practice. The more we immerse ourselves in the language, the more our brains will naturally start to think and operate in that language.
And this all ties back to that idea of fluency as automaticity, right? It's about reaching that point where the language just flows effortlessly without having to consciously think about every word and grammar rule.
Exactly. It's like learning to ride a bike. At first you're wobbly and you have to think about every movement, but then with practice, it just becomes second nature. You just ride.
And the text suggests that the key to unlocking that kind of fluency is to approach language learning as a process of discovery and exploration rather than a rigid set of rules to be memorized.
Yeah, it's about embracing the messiness, the imperfections, and the joy of the journey.
And the text actually provides a really cool analogy for this process. It compares language acquisition to building a second brain. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it's this idea that as we immerse ourselves in a new language, we're essentially creating new neural pathways, new ways of thinking and processing information.
Yeah, it's like building a parallel system that operates alongside our native language brain and allows us to access a whole new world of thought and expression.
That's such a mind-blowing concept. It makes me think of those bilingual individuals who seem to effortlessly switch between languages, almost like they have different personalities for each one.
And the text argues that we can all develop that kind of fluency, that cognitive flexibility through consistent exposure and practice. It's not a special talent that some people are born with. It's a skill that we can all cultivate.
That's so encouraging to hear. And it really highlights the transformative power of language learning. It's not just about acquiring a new skill, it's about expanding our minds, our perspectives, and our very sense of self.
Exactly. It's about embracing the beauty and the challenge of connecting with another culture, another way of seeing the world, and ultimately another way of being.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. It's really given me a whole new perspective on language learning and a renewed sense of motivation to keep pushing myself towards fluency.
That's great to hear. And remember, fluency is not a destination, it's a journey. It's about embracing the process, enjoying the ups and downs, and celebrating every step of progress along the way.
That's a great reminder, and it really takes the pressure off. Instead of focusing on reaching some elusive end goal, I can just focus on enjoying the ride and seeing where it takes me.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe along the way you'll even discover some hidden talents or passions that you never knew you had.
I love that, and I think that's a perfect note to end on for today's deep dive. We've covered so much ground, and I'm already feeling inspired to put some of these techniques into practice.
That's awesome. And to our listeners, we encourage you to pick up a copy of Princy Richishani Tumachenia, Droga do Penoshi Chizikois. If you're interested in diving deeper into this topic, it's full of fascinating insights and practical tips that can help you on your own language learning journey.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep practicing, and keep embracing the joy of language learning.
We'll see you on the next deep dive. And one thing that this test really emphasizes is that, everybody learns differently.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another.
Totally. I mean, we all have different, learning styles.
Right. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind when you're on this journey to fluency. It's not about finding the one right method.
It's more about finding what works for you.
Exactly. It's about experimenting with different techniques, different resources.
Yeah, just kind of seeing what clicks.
Right. And not being afraid to, ditch something if it's not working for you.
Totally. And I think that's something that the text does a really good job of, is it kind of encourages us to think of language learning as this process of self-discovery.
Yeah.
Not just as this quest for fluency.
Right. It's about kind of exploring different approaches and finding what truly sparks your joy and motivation.
Yeah. And speaking of joy, I remember earlier you mentioned the importance of stories in language learning.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like stories are kind of this natural way to make language come alive,
Right.
to create that sense of engagement and emotional connection.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful point. And the text really dives deep into the power of stories.
It does.
Arguing that they're not just a form of entertainment,
Right.
but a fundamental way that humans learn and make sense of the world.
So instead of just memorizing vocabulary lists and grammar rules,
Yeah.
we should be looking for ways to experience the language through stories, through those narratives
Yeah.
that kind of capture our imagination.
Yeah, and there are so many different ways to do that. You could try reading children's books in your target language,
Ooh, that's a good one.
or listening to podcasts that tell stories.
Yeah.
Even just watching movies or TV shows with the subtitles on.
Yeah, those are all great ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like tricking yourself into learning because you're enjoying it so much.
Exactly. And the beauty of stories is that they provide context.
Right.
They give those words and grammar rules a real world application.
Yeah, it's not just this abstract concept anymore.
Right. It's oh, okay, I see how this word is used
Exactly.
in an actual sentence, in an actual situation.
And you're much more likely to remember a new word or a new grammar rule
Right.
if you encounter it in a story that makes you laugh or cry or, that transports you to a different place or time.
Exactly. It's those words and phrases become embedded in a memory,
Yeah.
an experience.
And the text really encourages us to actively seek out those kinds of experiences,
Right.
to make language learning an adventure, not just a chore.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Because it can be so easy to get bogged down in the textbooks and the grammar exercises.
Right.
But when you start to see it as this this adventure, this exploration, it just becomes so much more fun and engaging.
Exactly. And I think that's when the real magic happens.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that idea of letting go of perfectionism,
Wow.
which we talked about earlier.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being playful and experimental.
Yeah,
And just kind of seeing what happens.
exactly. And I think that's something that a lot of language learners struggle with, is that fear of making mistakes.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We're so afraid of sounding silly or saying something wrong.
Right.
But the text actually argues that perfectionism is the enemy of fluency. Really.
Yeah, if you're constantly worried about making mistakes, you'll never develop the confidence to speak freely.
Yeah.
to just let the words flow out.
You'll be stuck in your head, like overthinking every word.
Right, and afraid to take risks.
And the text kind of reframes mistakes as like these essential learning tools.
Yeah,
They're not something to be ashamed of,
right.
but something to embrace.
Exactly. They highlight those gaps in your knowledge.
Yeah.
They push your brain to adapt. And most importantly,
Yeah.
they desensitize you to that fear of speaking.
Because the more you make mistakes, the more comfortable you become with like making mistakes.
Exactly. You realize that it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And that people are generally pretty forgiving, especially when they know that you're learning a new language.
Totally. And I think that's something that's really important to remember is that everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah.
Even native speakers.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's not like this sign that you're not good at languages
Yeah.
or that you're never going to be fluent.
Right. It's just part of the process.
Exactly. And the text kind of encourages us to shift our perspective on mistakes,
Yeah,
to see them not as failures, but as opportunities.
exactly. Every error is a chance to learn and improve.
Yeah. And I think that's a really liberating way to think about it.
It is.
It takes the pressure off and allows you to just like focus on the joy of learning and the joy of experimenting.
Exactly. And the text emphasizes that joy. That emotional connection to the language is a key ingredient in the fluency recipe.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about the cognitive side of things,
Right.
but about tapping into that emotional power of language.
Exactly. Emotions are incredibly powerful. They can help us remember things more vividly.
Right.
They can motivate us. They can inspire us. And the text argues that we should be harnessing that power in our language learning.
So instead of just like passively learning vocabulary lists,
Yeah.
we should be actively looking for ways to connect those words and phrases
Right.
to experiences and emotions that resonate with us.
Exactly. Think about the things that you remember most vividly from your own life.
Yeah.
Are they dry facts and figures, or are they experiences that were filled with laughter, excitement, maybe even a little bit of embarrassment?
Definitely the experiences, the things that made me feel something.
Exactly. And the text suggests applying that same principle to language learning.
Yeah?
Find ways to make the language feel real and relevant.
Yeah, to connect it to your own life and experiences.
Yeah. Exactly. It's about making it personal, making it meaningful. And I think that's when it really starts to stick.
So it's like weaving the language into the fabric of our lives.
Yeah.
Our experiences, our emotions.
Exactly.
And that makes so much sense because like those songs or poems that touch us deeply,
Yeah. Yeah.
we remember the words because they're tied to a feeling,
Right.
a memory,
Right.
something that moves us.
Exactly. And the text argues that language learning should be no different.
Yeah.
It should be something that we connect with on an emotional level, something that makes us feel something.
And the text actually offers some really cool suggestions for how to do that.
Yeah.
Like writing about your personal experiences in the target language,
Oh, yeah. That's a great one.
exploring topics that you're genuinely interested in,
Yeah.
even just finding ways to express your own unique personality through the language.
Exactly. It's about taking ownership of the language.
Yeah.
Making it an extension of yourself.
Not just something foreign and separate.
Right. And I think that's when you really start to unlock that fluency that you're looking for.
Because it becomes a part of who you are.
Exactly.
It's not just something that you're studying or learning.
Right. It's something that you're living.
This is all so insightful, and it really highlights the richness and complexity of the language learning process.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing words and rules,
Right.
but about connecting with the language on this like deeper, more holistic level.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes it so rewarding.
Yeah, because it's a journey.
It is.
It's not just a destination.
Right. And it's a journey that can take you to some really amazing places.
That's a beautiful way to put it, and I think that's a perfect note to end on for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
We've covered so much ground,
We have.
and I'm already feeling so inspired.
That's awesome. And to our listeners,
Yeah.
we hope this conversation has inspired you to embrace the challenge of language learning, to find joy in the process
Yeah.
and to celebrate that incredible transformative power of language.
And if you're ready to take the plunge,
Yeah.
we encourage you to pick up a copy of Przewycienie tłumaczenia, Droga do Płynności Jessicowej.
It's a mouthful,
It is.
but it's a treasure trove of insights and practical techniques
Yeah.
that can help you unlock your fluency potential.
So as we wrap up today's deep dive, we leave you with a challenge.
Oh, a challenge.
Yeah, think about a simple phrase or expression in your target language that
Okay.
you've always wanted to master.
Okay.
Now challenge yourself to use it in a real conversation this week.
I love it.
Notice how it feels,
Yeah.
how people react,
Yeah.
and how it deepens your connection with the language.
That's awesome.
So until next time,
Yeah.
keep diving.
Keep diving.
It's amazing to think about how learning a new language can really change how we see the world.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like it opens up all these new perspectives and ways of thinking.
It really does. And as we wrap up our deep dive into this text, I think it's so clear that fluency is about so much more than just memorizing words and grammar.
Oh, for sure. It's about embracing this whole new mindset, really seeing the world through a different lens.
And the text uses this beautiful analogy of building a bridge.
Oh, yeah.
It's like you're building a bridge between two worlds, connecting not just words, but cultures and people.
I love that. And like any bridge, it takes effort to build.
It does. Yeah, there are going to be challenges, times when it feels tough.
Definitely. But the view from the other side is incredible.
It's so worth it. And one of the things that really stuck with me from this text is that it's okay to let go of perfection.
Oh, yeah. You don't have to be perfect to be fluent.
In fact, it's those imperfections, those mistakes that actually help us learn and grow.
Totally. They show us where the gaps are and they push us to keep going.
It's like those mistakes are like little signposts pointing us in the right direction.
I like that. And the more mistakes we make, the less afraid of them we become.
Exactly. It's like we build up this resilience, this confidence to just keep trying even when we mess up.
And one of the most fascinating things about language learning is how it actually changes our brains.
Oh yeah, the text talked about building a second brain.
Right, like literally creating new neural pathways.
It's mind-blowing to think about, and it makes me wonder, like, what other hidden potential is lurking in our brains just waiting to be unlocked?
Who knows, but I think it's safe to say that language learning is one of the most powerful tools we have for expanding our minds.
Absolutely, and it's a tool that's available to everyone.
It is. You don't have to be a genius or a language whiz to learn a new language.
You just have to be willing to put in the time and effort and to embrace the journey.
And to have fun along the way.
Yes, that's so important. Language learning should be enjoyable.
It should be. It's about connecting with another culture, another way of life.
It's about opening ourselves up to new experiences and new possibilities.
And it's about challenging ourselves to grow and evolve.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on language learning.
Me too. And to our listeners, we hope you feel inspired to continue your own language journeys.
And to embrace the transformative power of language.
So keep exploring, keep practicing, and keep diving into the incredible world of language.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.